Hello, very good morning to you. Welcome to Arise News. I'm David Glencross here in London. It's Thursday, the 28th of August, and our top story at this hour. An Australian who's been negotiating for the release of 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram from their school in northeast Nigeria has today accused unnamed politicians of funding the Islamist fighters. Well, according to Nigeria's This Day newspaper, Dr. Stephen Davies is saying that Nigerian politicians are one of Boko Haram's primary sources of funding. Well, he also told ABC News Australia that Boko Haram has had training from Al-Qaeda, and he says he was very close to freeing some of the girls, but that just 15 minutes before he reached the village where they had been left by their kidnappers, a different group of fighters arrived and then kidnapped them again. Well, Dr. Davis has just returned to Australia after 4 months in Nigeria, negotiating to free the Chibok schoolgirls. He has worked in the country in the past, successfully securing the release of kidnapped oil workers in the Niger Delta. Well, he joins us now on the phone. A very good morning to you, Dr. Davis. Very interesting what you're saying here, that politicians may well be involved in funding Boko Haram, but can you name them? Have you told President Jonathan of this scenario? What's the backdrop to it?
Happy to name them on your program. They are, we've known for some time that politicians have been breeding up gangs as they head towards elections, and one prominent politician in the northeast won an election, and 2 elections, successive elections, using young men that were the genesis of Boko Haram, arming them, and other politicians have used similar means. We now have some of the most prominent politicians in Nigeria have been the major sources of funding for Boko Haram, and indeed, as a sponsor, you can participate by nominating targets, which one of them has done, to our knowledge.
And of course, you have absolutely no axe to grind here. I mean, you're an individual who is completely neutral. Okay, you have been an advisor to 2 presidents in the past, but we have heard on our own, obviously, allegations like this before, whereby even President Jonathan himself has said that, as far as he is concerned, he knows that certain politicians support and back Boko Haram. But who are these people? Is there a group of them? Are they working in tandem? And why are they supporting them? Well,
we've had this in the Niger Delta. In fact, when in 2004, when I did the surrender of the main rebel group down there, and then when I was working at Coventry Cathedral's reconciliation group for a few years thereafter, we found repeatedly that that candidates for the governorship or were in any of the 36 states often funded gangs, heavily armed them, AK-47s, RPGs. After the election was over, the candidate had won, they abandoned these guys who were heavily armed. Now, this has happened in the north. It's not uncommon. Yes, I have worked for presidents in the past. One Christian president, one Muslim president. Both were horrified by what was going on, but growing. This has been fueled by several politicians, mainly northern, who, my view now would be that they want to certainly take power at the next election. The problem facing President Jonathan, of course, is he now arrests prominent politicians who may be candidates at the next election. Then, of course, I would suspect that it's the US, the UK, and France, at least, who will cry foul. Say, you are, in fact, arresting people to your own advantage in the election. So his threshold for evidence is very, very high. And I don't think that he'll be able to gather sufficient evidence to keep those Western nations happy before this thing is totally out of hand.
So do you think that indeed if this is the case, that some powerful politicians are backing Boko Haram, they didn't know that things would, as it were, get out of hand like this? Because of course we know that Boko Haram has been, as it were, in talks with the likes of Al-Shabaab and other terror groups, including the Islamic State. So things are getting even more serious.
Well, in 2005 and 6, when I was in the far north, talking to some of the cell leaders, there were only 3 cells at that stage, they were certainly being wooed by Al-Qaeda. And they had grown out of a very fundamentalist Wahhabist view of the world, and which mutated pretty quickly. Now, what's happened really since then is these politicians, yes, they have cultivated. However, this now, you're absolutely right. There are Al-Shabaab connections. There have been for at least 18 months that I know of. The guys do meet. When they go on the Hajj, they will meet others from like mind, and they'll find common ground. When these politicians, if they were to be able to come into power in February next year after the election, I suspect that they will have a shock. This is one time they will not be able to turn these guys off, because we have the Tuareg leaders in Mali who are training Boko Haram fighters and sending them back, as well as the connections with Al-Shabaab and ISIS. These politicians will not be able to turn these guys off, and you'll have the if you like, the connection between Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and Boko Haram, or AQ in the Maghreb. This will flow, and I think what you will be seeing early next year is the new home of fundamentalist terrorism in the world will be that triangle.
Okay, let me take you back to the beginning of our conversation, where you said that you would name on this program those politicians who are supporting Boko Haram. One, are you prepared to do that? And two, you were also saying that these politicians were actually nominating targets for Boko Haram as well. Can you speak to those two questions?
Certainly. Well, the first thing that should happen in Nigeria is arresting the sponsors. This would slow this down dramatically. The fighting would slow down dramatically, and the Nigerian military may have a chance of overcoming Boko Haram. First thing to do is go and arrest former Governor Sharif, former Borno Governor Sharif, who has been funding this for years, built these guys up. He is so frightened that he's going to be picked up. He has now switched parties to the ruling PDP in the hope this will give him protection. That guy is really got to go. And he's enormously corrupt. Why the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has not yet picked him up is anybody's guess. We can start with one. There is the former Chief of Army Staff, retired in January, well, actually sacked by the President, is another sponsor. I'll give you the names if you like, but I have no fear of it. We're very confident, and it's in fact Boko Haram senior commanders who have been naming them in the interactions I've had over many months, confirming what we knew some time before from other commanders. But we've had the nephew of one man, three of his nephews actually participated in the bombing of the Abuja bus station earlier this year, which with, I think, at least 77 people were killed. They were living in the house with him. He has been linked several times to these activities, and yet why doesn't someone, with the interrogation of the nephews who are in custody by the state security services, in other words, domestic security services, does not seem inclined to want to interrogate these young men to produce concrete evidence against their uncle in whose house they were living and planning the activity. And, quite remarkable.
It is remarkable. Apart from that, about Chibok itself, I mean, how were you able to leverage your own contacts to get so close to Boko Haram then? And I think you were suggesting as well that, okay, the schoolgirls were taken from Chibok school, but then afterwards there was another 300 children kidnapped.
There are, in the last year, the kidnappings have been going on since probably mid-last year, July, August, really picked up. And at this stage, we would say that apart from what are now about 220 Chibok girls out there, there's at least 300 other girls that we know of who have been kidnapped from villages and towns through the northeast. The problem we found in getting the girls, where we could negotiating the release or handing over some girls as the first stage of a peace deal, was that the sponsors soon found out what I was up to over there, and they had other Boko Haram cells threaten the ones we were dealing with that they would kill all the guys there. So that became a problem. If girls started to be handed over, the peace deal and the peace discussions were going to pick up again. People don't seem to realise that President Jonathan has made huge progress on peace discussions over the last 2 years. It was only leading up to this election that the sponsors, the other the politicians, really picked up to pour cold water on all of the peace discussions. We were, at this stage last year, sitting down with the 24 leaders of Boko Haram, nutting out the last parts of a peace deal. And that was sabotaged. So, and then when I was over there the last 4 months, President Jonathan gave me all the logistical support that I required whenever I requested to continue this work. So there seems to be the idea that he doesn't know what's going on, or has not been too concerned, but that's, I find, a long way from the truth, in fact. So these other girls have been, through some circumstances, one way or another, we have been able to get out 4 of the Chibok girls, but only 4. Because what we found was if we were able to get out 20 or 30, then the sponsors just made sure that the guys went and kidnapped another 50 to replace them. But in the course of kidnapping them, they may kill 60 or 70 other people in the village. So we quickly came to the conclusion that freeing Chibok girls was only putting other girls in a more perilous situation and costing the lives of many other people. So what we've been doing since then is actually helping girls who look like girls who are able to get out, escape, pick them up wherever we can get the whisper about them, and bring them into a safe haven and support these girls who've had really, really terrible traumatic experiences in these camps.
And I wonder if you could walk us through the scenario. I mean, it's the case that you engineered the potential release of some of these schoolgirls, but then at one point outside a village, I think that another group came in and kidnapped them from Boko Haram. Could you lead us through what happened there?
Well, we set up with some Boko Haram, 3 of the senior commanders, to hand over a group of girls. And among those girls, part of the way we got them was they said, they told us at that stage in the group that they had, 3 of the girls had died and 11 were ill, very sick. They tried to give them IVs and it hadn't worked, so we could only imagine what they had done to the girls trying to give them IVs, but at least there was an attempt to keep them alive. By the time we got underway, the 11 ill ones had gone up to 18, and so the president gave me a military jet, got me up there, and we had a military convoy with ambulances from the local hospital, set up a trauma unit to bring the girls back to. We were waiting. The deal was that Boko Haram would bring them over the border from Cameroon to a village. They would leave the girls there, then call us and tell us where they were, because there are so many villages along the border areas, quite a large and remote border area. And that would give us probably an hour to get to the village and an hour for Boko Haram to get away.
All right.
Now, this was the first step towards a peace deal. So we got the call the appointed morning at 11 o'clock, and there were far more girls than we thought. 20 vehicles with upwards of 60 girls, and so we set out with a number of 3 ambulance buses. It was a 4.5-hour trip in the end because of the roads were so bad, and just on dark, as we got close to there, we were led a bit of a merry chase around the way, and when we reached a very remote village and a remote farm outside, the girls, we'd missed them by about 15 minutes. Why that had happened in part was because the police had offered a very, very, very large reward for the girls 24 hours beforehand, and so someone connected with the kidnapping of the Chibok girls, who have a fairly good information about that, decided, well, they might just, they knew where the girls were being handed over, and they clearly decided that they would collect the reward, so they grabbed the girls. Boko Haram, the Boko Haram commanders apparently kept an eye on the whole situation and were able to tell me in great detail the next day all that had occurred. And what of the girls? Well, the girls were back with Boko Haram, and what of those who had taken the girls? The girls had been left at the village. What of those who had come and taken the girls before we arrived? Well, the commander said they've taken care of those people. They didn't give them the details, but I'm sure it wasn't a pleasant outcome.
You're outlining what looks like a pretty hopeless situation for those girls, but what would you be recommending from your point of view then, having been so intimate with the situation there?
Well, I think there's 3 things at the moment. Just getting the girls and targeting that is useless. Doing a raid on the villages where the girls are, you risk their lives. It's very clear that to be able to take the sponsors out of action will certainly leave Boko Haram adrift for a while. It will regroup. ISIS will move in, AQ will move in. They will give them the sort of leadership they need. But there will be a period of time when they will be adrift. And at that period of time, there are commanders in Boko Haram who are willing to hand over the girls and who want to do a peace deal. They want to demobilize. Now, those guys, they have told me clearly they will not attempt to hand over the girls or further discussions on peace because the sponsors will direct the other guys to kill those willing to enter into the peace deal. So without the sponsors being active, we can start the peace deal. The second major problem is that the Boko Haram camps up around the borders so they can slip back and forth between the countries. They set out on a convoy to attack a town. It might take them an hour and a half to get there. That's the ideal time to hit them. On the way back from the town, they may have 30, 40, 50 girls on board or other captives. So that's not the time to hit them. But the Nigerian military does not know that these guys are en route until they're almost at the town. The particular problem with this at the moment is France, the UK and the US all agreed in Paris that they would assist Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger working on this matter. The US, for example, said they would assist with intelligence, whether that's drones, satellites or whatever. No intel is being handed to Nigeria to interdict when Boko Haram leaves a camp. Boko Haram leaves their camp, they travel without interference to a town. They may, as in the case of Mungono last week, a significant town, they destroyed 6 villages with the people en route to that town. And no one touched them. And as I say, on the way back, you dare not attack a convoy, as you might like to, because there may be 40 or 50 girls in those vehicles. So one wonders why. Why, if the US, the UK are really serious about this, and France, why isn't there the cooperation to interdict Boko Haram when they're en route? For goodness sake, it's an arid area. You can see a convoy 6 miles away, And these guys travel in convoys, 20, 40, 60 vehicles with armed personnel carriers, APCs. I'm astonished with that. There is something very, very, very wrong going on in the cooperation that was pledged.
All right, Dr. Stephen Davis, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out to speak to us this morning. And of course, some very powerful allegations and claims being made by Dr. Davis there, and we'll be reaching out to some of the people he was making the allegations against and trying to get some reaction from them. And we will, of course, be speaking to a senior member of the APC, the opposition party in Nigeria, hopefully within the next hour or so. But